And welcome to episode 11 of the Actual Astronomy podcast. And these are talks and conversations between myself, Chris, and Shane, and we are amateur astronomers. And the topic for this particular podcast is going to be eyepieces are always looking good. Hey, Shane?
Hey, Chris. So true. Yes. We've talked about eyepieces probably every single episode, and I think it's time we just dedicate a whole episode to eyepieces.
Yeah, and people should start exploring the night sky with binoculars, but eventually, most people who get pretty serious into astronomy, they're going to be buying telescopes, and then they're going to be trying to buy eyepieces for those telescopes. And a lot of the time, people tend to have an easier time making up their mind about what telescope to get. They put all their effort into that, and then they're like, "Great, that's done." But then it comes down to choosing the eyepieces. So what eyepieces are you currently looking forward to most using in your new telescope, Shane?
I would say some older orthoscopic eyepieces that I collected kind of over the last fall and winter. I'm excited to use them for a couple of reasons. They're supposed to be really good orthoscopic eyepieces, which are renowned for great contrast, a lot of detail. So really good for planets, which we're having a really good planetary season coming up. So that's kind of reason one. Reason two is where we live, winter means very, very cold. So as a result of very, very cold, I really haven't used them. So I'm very curious just to see how they perform, and they should be a great match in the new telescope that I got.
And by very cold, because very cold means something extremely different for somebody who lives in Florida and somebody lives where we live. So you and I actually did one session, and I'll never forget this. It was registering as minus 30 degrees Celsius, which I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but that's pretty cold. And I was thinking, boy, like I've been outside a lot in the winter, and I used to work outside in the winter, and I must be getting really wimpy or something in my older age, and I was really kind of sad that I could only hack it for a couple hours that night. I remember we were at somebody's farmhouse, and when I went home, it was registering minus 42. And I came to find out by the owner of that farmhouse that in Toyota vehicles, the temperature gauge only goes down to minus 30. So
Well, and so minus 30 Celsius is minus 22 Fahrenheit. And then what did you say? Minus 42?
minus 42 is what it was that night, I
Minus
think.
42 centigrade is minus 43.6 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, so it's kind of right where the the curves cross is kind of where we're observing some of the time.
Yeah. And it's not that cold all of the time here, but
When
that's
it's
not
clear.
common. And that's exactly it. When it's clear, it's probably the warmest on a clear night in the middle of January is probably going to be minus 20 to 25 Celsius, which, that's negative 13 Fahrenheit. And here on the flat prairie, there's often a little breeze, and that wind chill, I can usually tolerate the cold, but that wind, goes right through you.
I always say that we get out there and it's windy and it's that cold, and you kind of give me that look like, are we crazy to be out here? And I say, at least it'll keep the bugs off.
Yep, no mosquitoes.
So Shane, what are eyepieces and how do they work?
So the eyepiece is what you look through in a telescope. Essentially, they're interchangeable, and they essentially they vary your magnification. From low powers to higher powers, and as you increase magnification, your field of view sort of subjectively shrinks in a way because you're magnifying everything, but you're increasing the size or the scale of the image that you're looking at, and often darkening the background as well.
Yeah, and so sort of speaking of sizes, eyepieces come in three of the most popular sizing formats. What are those sizes like? This is like the actual physical size of the eyepiece.
So the common ones nowadays are 1.25 inch barrel. So that's the diameter of the barrel, and 2 inch. 2 inch gives you wider field of views. And then 1.25 inch, there's probably just, I'd say there's more eyepiece variability or different focal lengths available. And then the third one, which is not as common because I don't think they're really made anymore, but it's 0.965 inch. Now, this size of eyepiece was very common 50s, 60s, and 70s.
And in Japan.
And
Yeah.
sorry?
And in Japan.
Yeah, yeah. And eyepiece makers have just moved on. Those have been, that size has been largely abandoned. However, there's still some outstanding old eyepieces in that size that you can find in the used market that perform quite well.
And then there's the odd 3 inch or 2.5 or 2 points. So you see every once in a while there's some manufacturer that has made or will make some sort of oddball sizing, but for the most part, we're talking about telescopic eyepieces. We're talking about the 1.25 and the 2 inch. I should add though that I think I said this would be like a Q&A session, and I would send you the questions, and I never sent you the questions. So Shane is talking completely out of his ear on this stuff. So
from the hip.
We'll see how you do, but it's sort of in keeping with the show where we don't do that much prep work. You do a little bit. I shouldn't say a little bit. You do all of the back end stuff, and then I'm kind of making up some questions here or there throughout the week, just based on very quick discussions that we have. And then when we go live to record these, you get what you get. So if you make a mistake, it's gonna go, and then we're gonna fix it later, right? So, all right, you mentioned some numbers with eyepieces. We've got a few different numbers on an eyepiece. So I'm holding an eyepiece here in my hand. It says MMs and F.O.V. And what do the MMs mean first?
MMs are the focal length.
So are these like camera lenses? Because camera lenses come in focal length too. Like you get a 55 millimeter lens.
Yeah, in a roundabout way, I think there's some similarities there. The millimeters indicates the focal length. The higher the number, the lower the magnification.
Which
so it's kind of an inverse proportion there
to the camera lens. Yeah, because that's the thing that people always get reversed when they're coming from the world of photography to the world of amateur astronomy, and they go out and buy like a nice 50 or 55 millimeter focal length, thinking they're going to be looking at planets with it, and that ain't happening. It's just going to give you super low power. I really like low power though, so I'm happy they went and did that. So the other thing that's on there is the AFOV. So what is the AFOV?
So that stands for apparent field of view.
Good. Like I feel like I should have like it's like a game show now, almost like Will Shane get these.
Yeah. See how many points I accumulate by the end of this thing. So the apparent field of view tells you how wide the field will appear when you're looking through the eyepiece. So a very common eyepiece that's been around for a long, long time is referred to as a plössl. And when the term plössl really is talking about, well, first of all, who invented the eyepiece in this case, but it's referring to the design of the lenses or the elements inside of the eyepiece. All eyepieces you look through, I guess there's a small caveat there, but basically 99.9% of all eyepieces out there have multiple glass elements inside of the barrel to do all sorts of different things. Correct the light correct the light coming through the glass. Sometimes magnify it. Provide wide field of views. Provide eye relief. We'll get into all of this stuff. But a plössl has about a 50-degree apparent field of view. And if you put in a wide field eyepiece, they can be anywhere from 68 degrees to over 100 degrees. So when you're looking at a plössl with 50 degrees, and then you switch it out for something that, say, has a 100-degree field of view, the plössl will feel like you're looking through a straw comparatively.
Yeah, and so one other way to kind of conceptualize this is if you're looking straight forward, we call that, say, more or less like the 0 point. And if you had a 60-degree eyepiece, you'd be able to put 3/5 at arm's length, sort of side by side, and go out 3/5 on one side of that straight ahead 0 point and 3/5 on the other side. So the 50 would be just slightly less than that. So you can understand. And that's just the sort of theoretical field of view, but it's not the TFOV. So what's the TFOV and how does it relate to the apparent field of view?
Well, the true field of view is TFOV, and that,
Ding.
hey, another 100 points. And what that refers to is how much of the actual sky you're seeing in that field of view. So often the apparent field of view will be a large number, like 50 degrees or 100 degrees. But your true field of view, on with the widest field eyepiece on a telescope that provides the widest field views possible, you're probably only going to be able to take in 7 to 8 degrees of true field of view, or 7 to 8 degrees of the sky.
Yeah, and that would probably even be a stretch because I think with my 60 millimeter f5.9, which I got a 2-inch focuser for, and I use a 40 millimeter 70-degree in. I believe the calculation is around the 7 or 7.4 or 7.5.
Okay.
So but I know there are there's some f5.5 60 mils, and then I know that there's the odd 50 millimeter or 55 millimeter, like 4.5 to f5. So yeah, probably absolute extreme limit on this is probably something around that 7.5 or 8 degrees, apart from some sort of custom or oddball finder someone's giddied up with a 2-inch focuser.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
What,
So
so what do you got next for me? I'm
yeah,
ready.
so what is ER?
Ah, yes. This is important to you and I, and should be important to just about anybody that wears eyeglasses. So ER is eye relief. And what that represents is how far your eye can be from kind of the surface of the lens, the surface of the eyepiece, in order to see the entire field of view. Now, eyeglass wearers will typically need anywhere from 15 to 20 millimeters of eye relief, and not all eyepieces have that level of eye relief. In fact, they really need to be specially designed to provide that. I mentioned Plossls earlier. Plossls don't have great eye relief through an entire focal range. A Plossl eye relief usually almost exactly coincides with the focal length. So if you're using a 20 millimeter Plossl, you're probably around 18 to 20 millimeters of eye relief. But if you drop that down to, say, a 10 millimeter Plossl, you only have 8 to 10 millimeters of eye relief. And for somebody who wears glasses, you're not going to be able to see the whole field of view, and it'll look constricted.
Yeah, so and it is a bit of a challenge. So I have eyes that are astigmatic, so almost at just about any power, I benefit from wearing my glasses. Unfortunately, and I've even tried this with the Pentax XO, and I found that at a 5 millimeter or at a 5 millimeter eyepiece in most of my instruments, I still get some advantage to wearing my eyeglasses, but. Let's see. So there's only really a small number of eyepieces that work really well with the glasses. Like I use the Pentax XWs. I think you had the Vixen LVWs. I think they work well.
Yeah, they work quite well. Although sometimes, depending on the telescope, the eye placement was really critical, and it would black out on me at a few different focal lengths,
Yeah.
which I found fairly annoying. But the Teleview Panoptic series, well,
Yeah.
I have the 24. I used to own the 35, and I have the 41, and all of those are fantastic with my glasses. The
And then
24 is getting a little tight, but it's because I think it's advertised as 19 millimeter, but and maybe that's another sort of caveat I'll throw out there is sometimes the manufacturer's ratings don't quite add up, or they're not quite well measured, because sometimes I'll find an eyepiece that is advertised at 15 millimeters of eye relief, works great for me, whereas some that are rated higher, closer to 20 millimeters, I find tight.
the only ones that I've seen that give this like pretty magical eye relief are the Pentax XWs, and they're sort of like not a super expensive eyepiece these days. They used to be seen as more expensive, but lots of other eyepieces have been released. But apart from those, you're really looking at something like Teleview Delights, which are a 60-degree apparent field of view eyepiece, the Pentax being a 70. And then Teleview has also released the Delos, which are a 72-degree. Although my understanding is the eye relief on those, and I've never looked through one, is maybe not the same way it is with the Delight and the Pentax. And then everything else is a little bit of a mixed bag. I know Explorer Scientific has a couple really expensive eyepieces that get great reviews for eye relief. I've got the Doctor or the Noblex 12.5 millimeter, which is a one-off eyepiece, and there's some others sort of here and there. But as far as those lines that that people might really be able to look at and trust in, that are going to have it, is pretty much limited to those Pentax and the Teleview Delight, maybe the Delos. I'm not so sure about those, but that's kind of like it. But so, do you wear glasses when you observe now, Shane? Like at those
Yeah.
high powers you were using in your refractor?
I go back and forth a little bit. So I do have an astigmatism, although in my dominant observing eye, uh, my astigmatism in that eye is very minor. So I can get away without glasses, and I'm able to adjust the focuser to accommodate my nearsightedness. I hate taking my glasses off when we're under a dark sky,
Yeah,
because I'm often going between a star chart and the eyepiece, and to put my glasses on and take them off drives me crazy. So they just stay on, and that's it. When I'm looking at planets, I don't mind taking my glasses off to use the orthoscopics, and orthoscopics are very similar to Plossos. The eye relief on them almost nearly matches the focal length. So when you get into some higher powers, the eye relief is very short, and you have to have your eyeball pretty close to the glass in order to see the whole field of view.
yeah.
Now, with that being said, I've kind of become accustomed to looking through these with my glasses, even though it's a narrow field of view. It's still perfectly observable, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, you're not going to see a great expanse through the eyepiece.
Well, and a lot of these, like the Pentax XO, like I find it the same now. It has some eye relief. I do have the Pentax XP, which has no eye relief, and it's not possible to see much of anything until you take glasses off. But I'm with you. But by the time you're into these 40-degree fields of view, it's pretty small anyway, and you just want to make
Mhm.
sure you line it up and get your tracking working, and then you can you can enjoy that view anyway, and just kind of sit back. But I actually don't mind removing my glasses, really, because I have really good nearsightedness. So when I lay in bed and read a book, or when I'm doing work that's not on a computer, like on my desk, that doesn't require wearing glasses, for me, I'm fine up to about 18 inches out. It's like my vision's totally good. It's just the farsightedness. So, however, I do notice, like when I'm even at the highest powers that I use, I really can't seem to get quite as sharp an image without my glasses as I can with my glasses. But I don't know. It could just be because my eyes are tired at night, and who knows.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so that's eye relief. So eye relief is really important for people who wear glasses and need to wear them. Some people don't mind taking their glasses on and off, but if you do need to wear glasses while you observe, and I do find it more comfortable just to leave my glasses on and observe than those Pentax XWs. They really take the cake, I think. But there's lots of other eyepieces, and it's fun to experiment. I haven't seen or heard of too many like 80 plus degree. I think, like I said, Explorer Scientific has a couple 90 degrees that work without glasses, or that work with glasses. But I've tried some of the 80 degrees that work or supposed to work with glasses. Teleview has the Type 4s, and they're okay. They've only got like a 12, 17, and a 22. I tried some other brands that have 80 degrees that are supposed to work with glasses. They didn't, I wouldn't recommend them. So really you're sticking around that 60 to 70 degree zone. And then as far as I know, none of the 100 degrees work with glasses.
No, no.
Yeah,
A lot of those are about 10 millimeters of eye relief, so they're quite tight. And there's no sense getting a 100 millimeter eyepiece if you have to wear your glasses when observing, because you're not going to see that 100-degree field of view.
yeah, exactly. And, that's kind of something that is a little bit difficult for people to understand. So yeah, good. So coatings. Let's talk about optical coatings for a second. What can you tell us about eyepiece coatings?
So all eyepiece manufacturers now use some form of coatings. Usually, you'll see designations like MC or FMC. MC stands for multi-coated. FMC stands for fully multi-coated. So if you see an MC badging, that means that, again, there's multiple lenses or glass elements within the eyepiece. Multi-coated means some of it has got coatings on it, probably not all of the surfaces. Fully multi-coated would indicate all surfaces are coated. And what these coatings do is try to control like stray light. Essentially, they're just trying to improve the view and increase the amount of light that passes through all of that glass. And coatings do help, and coatings are very important. And not all coatings are applied equally or as effective, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
for sure. And that's one thing like I noticed with a more expensive eyepiece, like you're going to get those really good, I think they're AR coatings, and they really give you this nice transmission. And the inexpensive coatings, on the other hand, you get like reflections sometimes, you'll get like bounce back of light, different sort of strange optical effects. So
Well, sometimes too, even with like a poor coatings or a cheaper eyepiece, you may put that in the telescope and think that the seeing isn't very good out because you can't get a tight focus on, say, the moon. But putting in an eyepiece of greater quality may all of a sudden improve the conditions. So it's not the conditions; it's the eyepiece.
yeah, and you and I have even run that against different telescopes and found out that the better optics you have, it's almost like your seeing magically improves, right? It's
Absolutely.
yeah, it's sort of a funny thing, like people often think that you're not maybe getting so much for the extra dollars, but that is sort of one of the magical properties of better optics. Better wave correction. Better wave correction does translate to less influence of any kind of disruption in the night sky. So yeah, we've definitely run that experiment. What about old eyepieces? You actually mentioned some older eyepieces here, so I kind of know your preference on this, and I've got some old eyepieces too. And are old eyepieces just as good as the new ones?
Yes and no, if that is an acceptable answer. I don't know if that
Sure.
scores me the points or not, but so some older eyepieces, again, they usually come in a barrel diameter of 0.965 inches, and I'd say that there's probably three main ones, but there's many more out there. But the three main ones that you'll come across would be of any quality that I'll speak with would be the Huygens, the orthoscopics, and Kellners. So the Huygens are usually designated like like if it's a 25 millimeter eyepiece, it would be like a 25H or H25. Kellner uses a K, and the orthos have an O. And they can be quite good depending on who made them and the care that was taken during that process. Now, particularly the Huygens and the Kellners typically get a bad rap in the astronomy world because a lot of these were cheaply made and packaged with cheap telescopes. So if anybody ever used one, they said, that's garbage. I'm moving on to something better like a Plossl. However, like if I have some Carl Zeiss Jena Huygens eyepieces, 25 and 16, I think. And I have some Takahashi Kellners. And one night I ran a little experiment between a 25 millimeter Carl Zeiss Jena Huygens with a 25 millimeter Takahashi Kellner with another 25 millimeter Takahashi MC Ortho. And they were all fantastic on axis. In fact, on axis, as good or better than many modern eyepieces. So on axis would mean kind of like in the sweet spot or in the middle of the eyepiece. The clarity, the contrast, they were just fantastic. Where they started to break down, though, were in some of the other categories. The Huygens has very poor eye relief, even at 25 millimeters. So, wearing my glasses was kind of a challenge, and the field was very narrow, the field of view. The Kellner, a little bit better in terms of the size of the field of view and a little bit better in terms of the eye relief. But then the orthoscopic blew them away with those other categories. Better eye relief, able to see the entire field of view, and it was a wider field of view, and sharp across the entire field. Whereas the Huygens and the Kellner break down a little bit towards the edges. Now, so overall, I prefer the orthoscopic, but again, on axis, they were all outstanding. And I've read some reports, and I've tried to. I've done limited testing, so I need to do a little bit more. But some people say that the Huygens eyepiece was specifically designed for long focal length achromatic telescopes to reduce the color or the chromatic aberration that you would see through the eyepiece.
Huh.
So, kind of an interesting thing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So, what's your favorite eyepiece?
To use in general, that's a
You
tough
you
one.
pick. You pick.
Yeah, I'm going to break that into two categories. Because I think there's two types of observing, at least for me. There's going to be observing where I really like to use some magnification, or stuff for, like, say, the moon or the planets. But then if I'm under a dark sky, I like a wider field of view. So if I'm under a dark sky, I'm probably going to be using my 31 millimeter Nagler. I think the field of view is, what is that, 88 degrees on those, or
Yep.
82 or 85? I
Naglers
don't know.
and Naglers are 82, but typically they're just under.
Okay. Yeah, that one for my wide field dark sky observing. The eye relief is perfect. It's got a beautiful wide field, but it gives you a little bit of magnification compared to some other wide fields that help darken the background and tease out a little more detail. If I'm using, if my targets are, more of a solar system variety where I want a little more power and contrast, I'm probably going to reach for, I don't know, a 9 millimeter orthoscopic, probably my Pentex SMC. Another great eyepiece that I use a lot is my Leica Zoom. It has a focal length range from like 17.9 millimeter down to, I think, 8.9 millimeter. So you can quickly just rotate the eyepiece to change the magnification and dial it into exactly what the local conditions will allow in terms of seeing.
Hmm. Cool.
How,
So, how many eyepieces do you own? That's
Gotta
like the
think about
hardest
this.
question.
Yeah, yeah.
The one that
So
stumped him.
yeah, so for the longest time, I really only owned like 4 or 5 eyepieces. So I have a 41 millimeter panoptic, 31 millimeter Nagler, the Leica Zoom, and then I acquired a 5 millimeter Nikon nav eyepiece just for a little more power. But then, like I mentioned, I've been collecting these orthoscopics of an older vintage since probably last fall. And within the orthos, they go from 25 millimeter to 2.8, and in between, there has to be 8 to 10 eyepieces in that range.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So, how many eyepieces do you think somebody needs to own, or what's the most useful number of eyepieces to own?
I think 3 is a great a number of eyepieces to have, and it doesn't matter if you're a beginner or somebody that is into this for a long time. Because Chris, when you and I go out observing to a dark site, how often would we change out an eyepiece?
Yeah, like sometimes I observe all night just with one eyepiece in.
Often I don't change it at all, right? Maybe once or twice in a night we'll put in something that's a higher power from a low power, but typically we stay with the low power and away we go. So I don't think you need a lot of eyepieces. What is usually recommended in a lot of books, and I agree with this, is get a low power eyepiece that provides you the widest field of view that your telescope can accommodate and that your wallet can accommodate.
Mm-hmm.
The wide field eyepiece helps you locate objects because it gives you that wider field of view. Then kind of a medium power eyepiece. So maybe I'll back up here. A wide field eyepiece is probably going to be in that 30 millimeter focal length, whether it's a 32 millimeter Plössl, that's an inch and a quarter, or something in the 2-inch variety. Then you want something that's probably mid power, something in that, I don't know, I'd say maybe 15 to 20 millimeter focal length. And then a higher power eyepiece, like maybe around 10 millimeter. Now, this is a very general recommendation. It also depends on your type of telescope. If you have a Cassegrain telescope with a really long focal length, that changes your eyepiece formula a little bit. But if you have, refractors or Dobsonians, you can get away with what I just stated.
Cool. So, what would we recommend, I guess? Like, I mean, a lot of the time I use a 40 millimeter. I'm using like F6 to F10 instruments. And like, I think like something in the 40 millimeter range, a 30 to 40, and then a 10. And I have a 1.6 times Barlow, which makes my 10 work more like something around like a 6.25. And then I use an inexpensive 4.7 millimeter ultra wide angle. And that's kind of like the sort of 4 powers that I keep on tap. And I've kind of read as much, like where people say like get something that's really low power, whatever that means for your instrument. A lot of my instruments, they can run as low as 8 power or 18 power, around 20 odd power. And then, that's low power. And then you want something around 50 power that gives you that next bump up, a nice 100 power, like we were talking in the last episode about you out observing, and you found you were kind of maxing out the sky even at 100 power. And then the next power up somewhere between like 125 and 160 is going to max out like generally what we consider to be pretty good nights. So, that's 1, 2, 3, say 4, maybe a max of 5 powers. So, people can either use, 3 or 4 eyepieces in a Barlow or 5 eyepieces, and I think that just about gives you the nicest selection of powers. So, yeah.
For
So
sure.
what's,
And a general rule that a lot of people follow as well when evaluating what is the highest power eyepiece I should have is usually 50 times per inch of aperture is what your telescope will allow. So you do that math and then figure out what focal length will get you there.
yeah. And, as well, like, a lot of the time people will buy that sort of higher power eyepiece, but much of the time you won't be able to use it. So it's going to be those sort of in between powers. And typically most instruments are going to be able to take that 100 power. I kind of think that if you can't get 100 power out of an instrument, you probably just shouldn't be using that instrument. I'm having trouble getting 100 power out of that 80, even though it's an Achromat and $100 telescope. I know that your fine hands are going to be able to turn that into a polished gem. So I think, yeah, I don't know what you scored. I stopped keeping track, but I think you got pretty close to 100%, if not 100%. The only one that stumped you was how many eyepieces you own. That's
Yeah.
kind of that was your hang up there today. So any other comments that you want to make on eyepieces? I think they're a lot of fun to have. I don't have a whole set of everything or anything. I am close with the Pentax XWs. I just need a 5. And I don't have the 30. I have everything else. I don't think I'm going to get the 30, but I think I'm probably going to get the 5, unless you really convince me that the Nikon SW 5 millimeter is a sock blowing eyepiece. Then maybe I would be convinced. So.
Yeah, the only other thing that I think I can mention right now is there's another factor with eyepieces, particularly if you're a refractor user like you and I, and that's the weight of the eyepiece. If you are going to be switching eyepieces throughout the course of the night, if you go from a heavy eyepiece to a light eyepiece, or a 2-inch to an inch and a quarter, you're probably going to run into some balance issues with your telescope on your mount, which means you have to readjust the telescope, and it's not impossible and it's not that hard, but it is a little bit of a pain. And as a result, that's one of the reasons why when we're in a dark sky, I often just leave the big Nagler in there, because to switch that out for something else causes all sorts of other, adjustments that need to be made. But it's also why I'm starting to really like these orthoscopic eyepieces. I can go from 25 millimeter orthoscopic down to the 2.8, and it's virtually the same weight of eyepiece across the whole, gambit of ranges. And it doesn't require me to rebalance the telescope at all. And I definitely give up that wider field of view. But for the planetary observing, I don't need it. And it just, again, it removes some of that factor that takes you away from actually observing, because you're messing around with the equipment. And that's not what you go outside to do. You go outside to look through the eyepiece.
Yeah, and just on that, like with my setups here now, and I'm trying to kind of get them more geared towards planetary, especially with all this being at home, and then trying to look at planets quite a bit. I think I need a different 1.25 inch wide. I have a 21.25 that has 70 degrees, but I'd really like to get like the full maximum field of view for kind of using my telescope as a finder, because I'm typically using undriven mounts. So just to have that finding capability in a 1.25 without having swapped. Like the Pentax 40 is pretty heavy. I use a really lightweight 30 millimeter wide field, and it's good for just kind of getting things in the field. But I think I'd benefit maybe from having something a little bit different there for my finder, 1.25, like you're using the Panoptic. So I think I might get a used eyepiece. I've been looking around for a used one, and it's lots of good used eyepieces out there. Not everything has to be bought new, and a lot of amateur astronomers take care of their equipment. So, but that's sort of to come. But yeah, my favorite planetary eyepiece is the Pentax 3.5. I think that is just amazing, and can be used with glasses. Next to that, the Pentax 5.1 XO is really nice, but small field of view and tight eye relief mean glasses are out. But I still have it, and that's kind of my ultimate planetary no glasses eyepiece, and I have my ultimate planetary eyepiece glasses on. So I feel like I'm kind of well covered on that end of the spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned earlier too about an undriven mount, and when you have a mount that doesn't have motors to track the sky, it is nice to have that wide field of view, because you're not having to nudge the telescope the entire observing session. You can position the telescope so that the planet typically, or whatever object, is on one side of the field of view, and you can just let it drift across and actually observe it without having to keep nudging the telescope. So that's a great reason to have a 80-degree field of view eyepiece versus a 40-degree field of view eyepiece that an orthoscopic provides.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, Shane. I think we're probably good there. I think we're at about time, and appreciate everybody listening. I checked while we were at a break between recordings. We recorded podcast 10 and podcast 11 this afternoon, and I noticed we were at about we were at 149 downloads. So I guess people are listening to this, which is really cool. Really appreciate people downloading it, and yeah. So thanks so much for all those that have been downloading and listening to this. And we're going to keep trying to make these, on a 1 or 2 per week basis, where we have a general chat, and then we have a focused topic in the next one. All right. So thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon, Shane.
Thank you. See you later.